My passion for Stoke-on-Trent comes from having worked here. We employ 200 people here, and that has introduced us to all sorts of the people that make up the place. Our interest in Stoke comes because it is the world's ceramic capital, and as our business makes pottery, there was no choice as to where to come. So I think that's probably fairly straightforward. I believe Stoke-on-Trent can make you happy. I think it's a place that makes you smile as you walk around, where everyone says hello as you go past them. I also think it's a place in which some of the most beautiful artefacts in the Western world have been made. Some of the things that Wedgwood and Spode and Davenport made in the 18th and 19th centuries defined England as the leader of decorative design. And Stoke still has that creative strain running right through the middle of it. And so I think Stoke can make you really happy. Thank you very much, Alan. Vice-Chancellor, distinguished and I hope happy Stokies. Here goes. Actually, just before here goes, as I went in, I heard someone saying if people come in late, they go in that side. And it gave me a horrible déjà vu about going to see a play. I'm a great... going to see a play. I'm a great devotee of E.F. Benson, a very marvellous writer some of you may know of, and this was a one-man show about his great characters, Map and Lucia, and it was in a theatre not dissimilar in layout from this, and he commanded the stage. He was quite a big and powerful. He's an actor called Aubrey Woods. He was quite a big fellow, and I was somewhere towards the back. And as I sat down, I saw, not particularly interested, that the piece had no interval. It was going to run for 80 minutes, and that was that. And I thought, well, that's fine. And needless to say, most uncharacteristically, I hasten to add, I was overcome by an absolutely frantic desire to go to the loo. And I thought, well, never mind, I'll just slip quietly out to the back. And it was quite light, like this room. And I gazed round. There was no door there. I gazed round, and I saw there was no door anywhere except the two doors that were there and there. And those two doors were the doors at the back of the stage, and he was standing rather in front of me, and I thought, this is awful, I can't possibly do this. Anyway, I waited, and I did the normal sort of leg twisting and wriggling around, and annoying person next to you in the theatre act for a bit, and then I thought, OK, listen, there's nothing for it, I'm going to have to go. And I thought, no, it's fine, I know the man. It made it worse. I know the man. Everybody is human in this room. They will know what's going on. They will be forgiving. So I pushed all the way down the line. I got down, I went to the door, I got to it. It was locked. I went round to the other side. Sorry. I got round to there. Again, locked. I was just desperate to get out. Eventually, some kind person let me out. I'm afraid I didn't go back for the second 25 minutes. So if anybody feels that way inclined, they will have my complete forgiveness, and they can both come and go as late as anybody wants to do in here. Very kindly, I've been given a title, which is Does Stoke-on-Trent Make You Happy? You very rarely actually get to write your own titles, in my experience. You come up with a title, and the kind people always say, oh yes, that's really good. So what we've said is, and it's always something slightly different. Well, obviously the answer is yes, but that doesn't make the whole evening, really. So we have to go into it in slightly more detail than that. And I tried to work out what did make me happy, because I'm not absolutely sure that Stoke in itself can single-handedly make one happy. And there are things that make you happy. You know, a lovely spring morning, falling in love, puppies, pricking out tomato plants, mainly eating, to be absolutely frank. I think that what makes me happiest is food. And most of all, sitting down in a restaurant at the beginning of dinner. I think there's something about that moment where you sit down and you see the menu and you're talking to the person opposite you, normally your wife, almost always. And I think that is probably the thing that makes me happiest of all, which is a bad thing, because there are good things about Stoke-on-Trent, but restaurants is not one of its top things. So to that extent, I think single-handedly Stoke possibly doesn't do that. I have got some slides you'll be pleased to hear in the modern way. And I am not sure that Stoke in itself makes you happy, because I think there are cities like Venice or Paris that might have the propensity and the single-handed, single-issue ability just to make you happy as you walk around. But I think Stoke is something rather subtler than that. So I think I wouldn't really go for that. What I was originally, I'm not going to renege on my task, I promise you, but what I was originally going to talk about was, can old buildings make you happy? Which obviously chalks one down as the most appalling fuddy-duddy, because obviously I think they can. I thought that sometimes buildings really do make you very, very happy. Lots of you will know this ceiling in St. Joe's in Burslem. That makes me very happy indeed. When I stand underneath that, I feel completely and totally enchanted, both by it, by the terrific surprise of finding that in a rather war-torn section of Burslem, and by the extraordinary story, which I'm sure you all know, but just in case a couple of you don't, when Father Brown decided to build a marvellous parish church, St. Joseph's Burslem, in the late 1920s, he had no money, and he had been collecting for some time to build what was to be a great cathedral at this end of the Potteries. He had, as you know, a rival in Tunstall already, so he had a lot to live up to. He was great friends with a man called Gordon Forsyth, or he was introduced to him by his MP, and Gordon Forsyth was principal of the Burslem Art School. Now, he realised that there was no way this building was going to come off, but he did realise that there was an unexploited resource, which was the unemployed pottery workers of Stoke. And so in the Burslem Art School, he set out to teach them to do all the amazing decorative arts required to furnish a fine Roman Catholic church, including the painting of this completely abnormally brilliant ceiling. And he also taught them to paint glass, and the painted glass windows in St. Joseph's are one of the great glories of Stoke-on-Trent. You may not see them because it's currently shut down, but I'm sure if you ask someone kindly, they'll let you in, because there are kind ladies who let you in. There used to be kind monks in slightly with rather grubby habits. No, not, that sounds worse than I mean it to be. What I more mean is that they had habits which were strangers to Sketchleys, I think, or wherever you get your habit done if you're a monk. But it is a very wonderful place. I recommend it to any of you. Other places make me happy. Obviously, the Bethesda makes me deliciously happy. I suppose part of that happiness is because you know that something was in terrible, terrible trouble, and then there is a glimmer of light at the end of the corridor, and you can see that suddenly things are going to look up, and the Bethesda is just that building. It is looking up now, and I think that makes one happy, and you will see that the theme is going to return to us. There are lots of buildings. I think Kew Garden. Some buildings actually are even more happy-making. This is an absurdly happy-making building because it's a great big glass. We know from the pricking out tomatoes that a big greenhouse is my fantasy anywhere, even at this scale I'd like. And you might need some help, but it is really nice. But that's a building which is a complete and total pleasure-drome of loveliness. That's Port Merion in Wales. That's going too far about trying to make buildings make you happy. That's pushing it. That's saying you're jolly well got to be happy when you come here. Fine when it looks like that. Jolly tricky if it's pouring with rain and the rendering's peeling off at the corners. So I think that while buildings can make you happy, it's probably more than anything else the associations with them, as well as the actual beauty of them that works in Stoke itself. I am, though, someone for whom buildings are incredibly important, and their association, particularly their part to play in the heritage of a place, of the inheritance of a place and of a community, is very, very important. Oh, hang on, I've missed one. It's all right, don't worry about it. Well, I found it again, it slipped around somewhere else. I've rearranged these slides several times. Buildings can also make you unhappy. This is an unhappy building story. These are the gates to the Nile Street factory of Doulton. When I was writing the book on Stoke, which Alan so kindly mentioned, I was driving around. It was one of the not infrequent moments of my life when I have had to lend my driving licence to the police for a number of months, or even a year in that case, And so was obliged to rely on someone else to drive me around. And I relied on Lee, who runs our studio in our factory at Emma Bridgewater, who was showing me some places I didn't know, and we were driving back. And as we drove down that street, she said, "Oh, look," and there's a rather good little gatehouse next to these gates. And I said, "I'd quite like to take a picture of that. I don't know whether it'll get in. The gates are rather brilliant." Anyway, and then I sat down with my sketchbook for a bit, and I realised that Lee, she said, "Lisa, I'm just going off, I'll be back in 20 minutes. And when I got back, she was looking very sad in the car. And I said, "What's up?" And she said, "Oh, this is making me feel incredibly sad." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, my father was a figurine painter in here on Dalton, and I used to come here at the end of the school day to collect him from work. And he'd come out with his brushes in his top pocket, smelling of shellac. And he'd go, and they'd go to the sweet shop over the road, demolished, and then walk home together, and all the other children, there'd be a little knot of school children by the gates. And that was the sort of ka-ching great moment for me, because I realised that those gates, those not very important gates, those nationally invisible, unimportant gates, they're just some gates. I should think they were probably made in about 1930. They've got some quite nice Ds, they're quite beautiful in their way, but they're not important, were in fact incredibly important in that particular way. And that they meant a lot to Lee, and they meant a lot to some of the other thousands of people whose parents had worked on Nile Street. And that when you lose those gates, when you lose the lodge next to them, and when you lose the buildings in which people worked, or the buildings in which they were born, or the buildings in which their grannies died, or their parents got married, or anything like that, that you're losing a very important thing, a cultural anchor for a place. And in a place like this, which is doing massive works to regenerate a city, those anchors are incredibly important. They are the lifelines for a sustained heritage of the community. They're really, really important. And the very careless way in which something like those gates get wiped away by a digger one morning is very much more expensive than the person who's made that decision has begun to think of. We'll go away from Stoke for a minute. Emma and I have 4 children, and 2 of them were born in Hammersmith in London, and 2 of them were born in Norwich in Norfolk. And the London babies were born in a hospital called the West London Hospital, which is very nice. I don't mean having them as Emma's department, but I mean the hospital, the building was nice, and because it was a nice building, when they moved out into the New Chelsea in Westminster, Ericsson, the telephone company, bought the building and made it its HQ. And it was lavishly done up, and there it is on Hammersmith Broadway. The Norfolk children were born in the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. Hello, hello, in you come. Hi. I haven't said anything yet, don't worry, it's fine. That was also abandoned because a new hospital was built. And that was knocked down. It was a marvellous tower block, a big 70s tower block, and on the 11th floor was the maternity ward. So all the dads who were waiting for the babies, and the mums who were waiting for the babies, could look out of the windows and see the whole of one of Britain's most beautiful cities laid out in front of them. It was the best view in the whole of Norfolk. But it was knocked down by the developers, and I realised then, and I feel very strongly now, that when I drive around the Hammersmith roundabout, I am reminded of our 2 larger children's, older children's, birth, and when I go around the Newmarket Road entrance to Norwich, I'm not, because the building's gone. It's another cultural anchor that's been let loose. And in the case of that tower block in Norwich, most people, maybe all of you, would have thought quite reasonably that it was a hideous, ugly 70s brutalist lump and no good. Actually, I think it would have made the best flats in Norwich, so I think the idea that that's gone is one of the craziest things I can possibly imagine, because I think they would have been worth £1 million a pop. But, nevertheless, it had to go, and I think that is a real sadness for the place. There you are, that's the Dalton bit. Now, there are buildings that have to go. The old Wedgwood Etruria factory had to go because it was going on its own accord, because Wedgwood had although brilliant in absolutely every way, turned out not to be a marvellous sort of geoseismic surveyor, and it was sinking into the mining bits underneath it. So it went. But it is very important. I don't know why, today has been my day of speaking. I did another thing this morning in Festival Park, in the splendid Best Western Hotel. I should be careful to say that, because I was merciless in slagging it off at the talk I gave after being given very generously the cup of coffee they'd given me when I went in. And I was made, as ever, painfully aware that Josiah Wedgwood, the world hero, Stoke's world hero, the house he built in order to say that something internationally important was going to be done there, something that was going to be as important, perhaps, as the iPhone or the iPad in late 18th century civilized Western world, something that everybody wanted. His extraordinary, sophisticated neoclassical wares that no one in the whole burgeoning continent of America or any of the other emerging colonies or anyone else in the country could possibly match. Built this extraordinary house for himself, and it has been saved, but it had been saved in such a way that it's very hard to make any sense of that connection now, because it is attached to one of the gloomiest buildings in the whole of Britain, in possibly one of the least attractive places you've ever seen. And when you walk out of there, were you to be a visitor to Stoke, you would not find yourself as you would if you went out of a hotel in London or Paris or Bristol or any other city in some interesting place full of nice treats. You'd find yourself, well, I mean, you would sign outside Bet365 offices, but I suppose that's something to recommend it, but it's hard to go very much further than that. And I think that is a dangerous thing to do. So the local anchors bit, the local heritage that is implicit in the buildings, in the built environment, is very important. And we, as a country, have a real appetite for that. We love our talismanic bits of built environment, even as in Anne Hathaway's cottage, it was probably her cousin's policeman's house, or whatever it was. It is nevertheless something that we all take very seriously, and we do so for really good reasons, because Anne Hathaway's cottage, which is probably, let's say, it being in leafy Stratford worth 400,000, is probably worth 400 million pounds to Stratford, because it is a very, very significant symbol of Shakespeare and everything that Stratford lives off. And that, I suppose, is rather a good analogy for quite how important a not important building can be. Okay, we're going to go on a little trip now, leaving the Midlands and Warwickshire zone. We're going to Nantes in Brittany, where Emma and I went earlier in the autumn. We've been hunting for places which are industrial, post-industrial places that have turned themselves round. Emma had said to me, now Nantes is the one to go to. It was a terrible industrial ruin. And then well, I have to say we got there. It's one of the most lovely cities I've ever been in. So it is, the whole analogy was a little bit less clear than I hoped, because it is a little bit lovelier than Stoke as a place. But there is a strong parallel. The Loire flows into the Atlantic at Nantes, or from there, and it was the seat of a sort of Clyde side of France. It's a great big shipping centre, and it was, I think, the biggest shipyard in France, and all the way along the left bank of this great river were huge factories and warehouses and wharfs, but mainly shipyards. And as has happened here, that business evaporated, went east, went north, went south. And a huge part, really bang in the middle of this big regional, nearly regional capital, I suppose, was completely redundant. Two people, I'm going to try and remember this because I only looked it up just now, they're called Francois Rosière, and the other man, strangely, is called Orifice, but I can't remember what his first name is. Anyway, Monsieur Orifice, are two very wonderful designers, two marvellous engineers, and really drawing from the extraordinary heritage of engineering that this city has from shipbuilding. They wanted somewhere to build these extraordinary things that they make, these machines. They're called the machine de Lille. Some of you may have seen this elephant. Have any of you seen this elephant in real life walking? Hands up if you've seen the elephant. 1 hand. Any other elephant had 2. Come on, fess up. 3 hands. It's not the kind of thing to be embarrassed. 4 hands. Extraordinary thing to be embarrassed about seeing elephants. You must have done worse things in your life than looking at elephants. This elephant is a most extraordinary machine. It is not exactly animatronic because it's a more sort of mechanical thing. It's a bit like a sort of tingly work of art. It's a big, articulated, beautifully carved, extraordinarily sort of Mad Maxy engineered giant item. Hard to define it, really. And wanting to build it, they found a benign mare, as indeed we're lucky enough to have in Stoke, and the empty sheds that have been hanging around, not knowing what to do, were handed over in part to these 2 designers, engineers, who used them in which to build their elephant. The elephant came to London. You might have seen the elephant in London. There also is someone called the Grand Bébé, which wanders around with a sou'wester, which I think went to Africa with them. And at the moment, they've made an extraordinary heron. When we went there, they were operating the heron. The heron is about as big as the bit at the front of here, the sort of stagey bit. And the thing about these animals is that they're operated by people. Us, we go in to operate them. So when they go along, we actually get to do stuff. So you get to sort of pull the eyelid open and shut, or sort of raise one leg like this. And it's completely brilliant because you're suddenly all participants in this performance as it trundles around the yard and goes back into its stable. The heron, I think, had to fly probably no more than about 100 yards, but it was a jolly big business getting everybody onto its back and getting the person who did its beak like this. And in fact, they've also got the most brilliant roundabout. You must think we are the most childish couple in the world, because we actually didn't have our children with us, but we went on to the roundabout where I found myself operating a stingray's sting, and I think Emma was doing something with a scallop somewhere. But anyway, we all had sort of fishy duties, and it's marvellous. A 3-story roundabout. The top bit is sort of fish on the top of the sea, like flying fish and dolphins, and the middle is sort of ordinary sea fish, and down the bottom are hideous creatures of the seabed. You can see I didn't take quite enough photographs, as it turns out. But they are all in this industrial place, and one of the things it's done has massively affected the number of people who go to Nantes, which is one of many French cities, and there are lots of French cities with lovely restaurants and nice courtyards, nice squares and nice parks and nice chateaux. Although, in fact, the chateau in Nantes is the last of the Loire chateau. If you go all the way down the Loire chateau, Nantes is your last stop. But that is one. We're going to keep going on our trip. Here's another one. Hands up, who knows where that is? Who knows where that is? Come on. OK, where is it? Ipswich. Very good bet. It's actually a place called Lens, because Ipswich is bad on coal mining, unfortunately, for Ipswich. Lucky for us. No, it's a good idea. It's Lens, which is outside Arras in northern France. And it's another place we went to just a couple of weeks ago to see another city which needed some regeneration and restoration, really. And Paris, being like all capital cities keen to regionalise a tiny bit, decided they would make an outpost of the Louvre. And Lens was the selected city. It's an unlikely city. It's just a big mining place. It's mainly ex-mining place, although there is some mining. And so this museum, which is a great big shed, and a really huge plain shed, which you can't see because my picture, I'm afraid, focuses on probably the best bit, which was the restaurant, which was absolutely delicious and precluded looking at the museum again in the afternoon, which is probably a good thing. But it was a huge thing in which they had put a sort of story of art in. So there was a bit of everything from the Assyrians and the Egyptians to the classical world, into the Gothic, through to the Renaissance, on into the Baroque, and on until the 19th century. And a little bit like the history of the world in 100 objects, they'd selected from the Louvre something to represent each movement, each phase, each decade almost. It's completely brilliant. I don't know. I think there probably were 300 pieces in there, I think, from a very, very fetching marble hermaphrodite, who when you first saw her, you were sure was just a marble lady lying down. But if you look closely, you can see there was slight surprise underneath the nether parts of the hermaphrodite. That was made in 300 BC, which shows how long those things have been going on for, to amazing painting of the Venetian ambassador visiting Damascus, which looked like it had been painted yesterday. It looked like a wonderful sort of photo report of an event. It's very good. Anyway, that's another place that came in and has had a dramatic effect on a place that obviously had almost no visitors whatsoever and now has thousands. It has in common with Stoke quite a curious road signage system, which means that once you arrive at Lens, you have to allow yourself 2.5 hours to find the place. You see it quite frequently behind a sort of flyover or under a road or round the corner, and you see signs saying you've arrived absolutely continuously. And when we arrived, we couldn't think why it said park and take this bus. Towards the end, we thought we could well have parked an hour before and got the bus, but it is a very wonderful idea, and it has worked. So, again, I suppose those are indirectly buildings that are making a place happy. And I think that what I really want to talk about is, can you make Stoke happy? Because that's a better question, really. And some people have got more chance of doing that than others, but in fact everybody has got. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. It's sort of to do with loving your city. I think that London is the world's preeminent city just at the moment. It's the place where everybody wants to be. It's got extraordinary housing prices, it's got extraordinary densities of stuff going on. It's very, very powerful. It's the place that people come to in Europe. It's almost nobody seems to be English when you walk down the street because everybody else has come there. So, however you look at it, I think it is a crashing and huge success just at the moment. And crowned with the Jubilympics year, it has had an extraordinary run of very, very well-judged and carefully worked-out success. One of the effects of that is that places that nobody had ever thought would be significant, would be visited, would be economic drivers, places that people thought were in fact total dumps, have become very, very important. This is Hoxton Square. When I was at art school at Chelsea, which we knew was the centre of London because London centred on Sloane Square, and we never knew why the West End was called that because it was obviously so far east. But oddly it was called that. There was something called the City where unknown people called bankers worked, but they weren't called bankers, they were called stockbrokers and merchant bankers at the time, so you didn't go there either. But there has been an extraordinary tsunami, a great big sort of tidal wave that swept away West London, which is now entirely inhabited by Russians and French people, and landed the detritus of England in the East End. And Hoxton Square, so I say when we were at art school, we used to go sort of really on anthropological trips to go and taste pie and eels and find out what the East End, this extraordinary thing called the East End, is like. Now, our children couldn't dream of buying a flat, not even a shed over the pizza restaurant in the East End, because it's become so extraordinarily popular. Hoxton Square, which has got the White Cube Gallery in it, has got a series of unbelievable restaurants, offices, it's got circus space, this extraordinary University of Performing Arts, has become a totally loved place. It's become that, as I'm going to get to in a minute, not because anybody ever had a plan to make Hoxton Square important. There were no master plans, there were no schemes. It was a dump. Good. So, that is the other thing that really makes you happy, which is a Labrador puppy. Nowadays, people are keen on the creative industries and artists. To dislike them or despise them is as strange as not liking a Labrador puppy. I thought you might have seen enough buildings for a bit, and it would be nice to see something that really was nice. I am a terrible sucker for that photograph, so I probably won't look at it, else I'll just get overmoved by it. Okay, this is the next little phase. By the way, I will just check. I haven't talked all evening because I think what happens is I talk for a bit, and then when I grind to a halt, you ask me a question. I turned the phone off earlier. Well, someone can tell me when they're bored, and I'll stop. We'll find out. No, not Labradors, sorry. So artists, this is the next theme, is artists, the stormtroopers of regeneration. This is my other little theme after the anchors, so you've got to remember the two themes, the anchors and the stormtroopers. Artists have no money, need space, are sexy and attractive. Not when they're 52, unfortunately, but earlier on they are. And because of that, they need to find somewhere to carry out what they do. And they leave art school, where they've tended to be somewhere rather nice, like Chelsea or Holborn or now King's Cross or wherever it happens to be, and then they have to find somewhere to carry out their practice. And so it would be nice to say they were needing always to have a north light, or they must have a river view, but in fact what they need to have is somewhere that costs almost nothing. And so they have to hunt out the place that is cheapest. It can't be the absolutely cheapest place, because they have to be somewhere near where they're able to sell what they're doing, but they are hunting the cheapest place. And so artists and designers and craftsmen and new creative industrial folk seek out cheap rents. Actually, what they really would like Mr. Orifice and his friend, is somewhere free. But failing somewhere free, they want somewhere cheap. So they go to the lowest property prices you can find. They go to somewhere that won't be sold but will be rented, or whatever it is. I'm afraid we're going to leave the Labrador. Have your last longing look at the puppy, because it's going for a bit. We could come back. If any of you later, during the questions, we might have the Labrador, just to make it more fun. And so, in London, those people have gone east. That's Columbia Road. Again, a place that was of no interest to anybody. It was one of many second-rate markets. It was a flower market, but it wasn't a place, when I was an art student, that we ever went to. It just wasn't a place that was on the map. I did know it was there. I had once been there, but really not. Now, every one of those shops behind there that was a cobbler's and a butcher's and a baker's has got some achingly trendy small artisan designer peddling their impractical wares to quite a large audience of visitors from around the world. That is a good thing in itself. It's a really good thing, because some of those people will turn into the businesses that will make employment, and small businesses, as we know, employ many more people than large businesses do in England. But it's got something more important to offer it. That's a surprise one. Those are birch trees on the left, the little bright green ones, and they are taking over some heather. And they are the first pioneer tree to regenerate. When you clear fell somewhere, the things that come through are birch trees. We had a very extraordinary architectural trip a couple of years ago to the bit of Russia that is about 5 hours north of Moscow. I think I never do any work with all these holidays. It's not entirely true. And these millions and millions of acres had all been very sort of basic collective farming areas of Russia. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, they've been abandoned. And the whole area, literally thousands of square miles, has turned into birch woods, because birches are the first tree to come back. If you leave, I mean, even here, if you leave a siding somewhere, it's birch trees, you see them bright green on a slag heap. They come through, they can deal with very, very poor nutrients, uncertain footing, lack of moisture, all sorts of things. They're just a very tough, short-lived, tough, very prolific tree. I'm just worrying I haven't made a bad analogy with the short-lived and tough bit, but I am making an analogy between them and the artists who went east. Because what happens is that the birch trees go in and they make that bit of wasteland into a wood. And inside that wood, under that wood, protected by the birch trees, encouraged in by the safety that those birches give against grazing animals, come the next trees, the alders and the ashes, and then inside them come the oaks. And so eventually, when the person who first saw the birch tree's grandson is dead, that's an oak forest that one's looking at. The birch trees have been the initial plant, the first one to settle. No, wrong. There we are. We've gone away again, another trip. We've gone to Williamsburg in Brooklyn. Williamsburg is the nice, look, there's a lady there who likes it there, birthplace of the hipster beard. I think they've now gone. I haven't been back there to check, but I think they've cut them off there and they're on the ground in the gutters. But it is a similar place. Brooklyn anyway is obviously the other side of the river in New York, but Williamsburg was a particularly scruffy kind of bit of it, and it has been colonized by these same stormtroopers of whom I am talking. And it has become the place where when you go to New York and you say, where shall I go? They say, oh, you've got to go there. I went to an amazing restaurant, I'm afraid the restaurant bit's coming through again, called the Meatball. Did you go to the Meatball Factory? Oh, so good. So there's four kinds of meatballs. Beef, pork, 5, lamb, veal or chicken. Don't go for chicken, real mistake, very dry. And then there were 5 sorts of sauce as well, and chips. So what a perfect restaurant. Absolutely there's endless deciding and no deciding to do. Absolutely marvellous. Well, I like that restaurant. There they are using it. But what happens? What happens when you have those artists? It's an incredibly important thing. Because artists are creative, as we said, stormtroopery in this way. They are also sexy. And because they are sexy and attractive and not grumpy and not bad-tempered, except the grumpy, bad-tempered ones who are, but because they're doing something that people who haven't got time or aren't creative find attractive. Very few artists look longingly at the offices of an insurance building and say, if only I could throw my brushes over my shoulder and sit down there and work out some, I can't even tell you what the insurance calculations that are required are because I never got into that office, but they don't do that. They hang on, they keep on painting. But the insurance folk definitely do want to get rid of their computer and get their brushes out. They're not going to do that, but they want to live in a place that makes them feel that they might. And so they will naturally move towards the honeypot, which is a place that artists colonize. And if you think of any big successful city, you will think that whether it is downtown New York, whether it's Greenwich Village, or whether it's the Left Bank in Paris, or whether it is Chelsea, and now whether it's Hoxton Square, that the place that people want to live is the place where it's fun, because you live in a city because it's fun. That's what cities are about. They're about being able to go to the theatre and go to the cinema and go out and feel like your life is going to go on forever and you're not 100 and frightfully bad-tempered and cross, which is, after all, what one feels most of the time. And you want to do that. The worst party in the world is a 40th birthday party where everyone is 40. It is a really, really gloomy event because all the 40-year-old people are exhausted. They're worn out, they're worked out, they've had a massive row about babysitting or about what the other person wanted to do instead. And they've got to the party and they're tired, and then they get that, everyone looks awful, and they go around and say, but you look so old. They don't say that, they say, gosh, you do look marvellous. But they don't, what they actually look round and they think is, gosh, you look so awful. And a 50-year-old party with 50-year-olds is worse. And so it goes on, I suppose, until you get into the 1780s when you can say, oh, you're still alive, yes. In which case, I'm hoping to enjoy that bit. I very much doubt that I'll get there, but if I did, I'll make the most of it. My father has a great feeling for that kind of thing, so I'm taking the lead from him. What makes a party good is when you have children and when you have teenagers. Really, you want teenagers because they can behave really badly and they can have the hangover the next day and you don't have to. That's a very attractive prospect of the party. You can see people out of control, having a nice time and taking the hangover back to their parents' house. You hope they're not your children, but even if they're your children, you can always go out for the morning, so it is possible. And you want to see grannies at a party because they've stopped caring. They don't mind. They're having a good time. They're also getting drunk. They won't talk about their hangover. Grannies don't get hangovers because they've drunk for so long they've stopped getting hangovers. But they also make a party go with a swing. So you need grannies and you need teenagers. Then you need small children because then they won't behave that badly, because just before the person sells the grandmother the heroin, they see the 7-year-old child and they don't do it. So they're also very important. So the multi-generational issue of a party is really important. Well, it's the same with towns and cities. It's really important that you have a complete mix all the time. The most disastrous thing you can possibly have is a terrible thing called zoning, which is, I think, fairly discredited now all over the place, but it was a very, very powerful idea that you should have the factories here, the offices there, and the houses there, and the old people over. What a dippy idea that you put the old people there. You want the old people to see the factory where they worked. You want them to look out of the window and see their grandchildren going to school. And you want them, if they can toddle down to the shops, to be able to do so. It's a most extraordinary idea, and it governed Britain for a very long time. It is, I think, now fairly dead, but it's a very, very bad idea. And I think that what all these places are saying, what I'm trying to say about them, is that you need to look after what will make it attractive to the settlers. Now, there we come into the big thorny issue of how you regenerate somewhere, because you can't just say, the place is a dump, help yourself. That doesn't work. Although you can say you can have a house for £1, and that really does work. It's been a huge success, and I hope it'll happen again, because I think it's one of the boldest and bravest things that's happened, and it's one of the best things to put Stoke on the map for the last few years. It's a headline that got into every single newspaper and made people realise this was an innovative city, and a city that meant business in terms of regeneration. But it is only a part of the story. Now, does that make you feel happy? I'm not absolutely sure that it does make me feel happy. I have, as John knows, a little bit of a bugbear about the Tesco roundabout area. It is the part of England that has more road signs per empty road than any other quarter mile in the whole universe. There are an absolutely endless supply of sticks and lights and flashy bits and flappy things. You can see that I am an exceptional photographer. You can probably tell those photographs that are taken by other people or with other cameras or taken from the internet, because this one is definitely taken in the car while Emma was driving past it this morning. Does that make you happy? No, it doesn't make you happy, despite the fact that it's got marvellous expenditure on public realm fitments in great degrees. It doesn't make you happy, and I think it doesn't make you happy because there's nothing left. You do need to make the roads work. You do need some of the signs and the lights. You do need to be able to widen things and change. But you need to hang on. And if you lose the whole place, and just as I deeply and totally admire the bits of the city that we are looking after, I feel very sad about this. This makes me sad, because I think this was a part of Hanley that was real, that was authentic. It was crappy, it was poor, it was unlooked after and not cared for by people, but it was real. In fact, it had one of the streets, probably had the street with the oldest buildings in Hanley in it, had a Chinese restaurant with slightly dubious hygiene issues, quite ill after that occasionally, so it's not that all restaurants are a good thing, but it was a part of the place that everybody had walked past. And it's very strange, I couldn't tell you where it was now, because when you drive, it's obviously much quicker now, you don't have to go the whole way around Hanley to get there, so there are good bits, but when you drive in, I actually don't know where the end of the road was. I don't know where the Masons' factory was. I went to see a nice man called Mr. Butler, who ran Masons about 25 years ago, and I said, "Oh, what's happening?" He said, "Oh, it's good news, we've been bought by Wedgwood." Those fateful words. "It's good news, we've been bought by Wedgwood." And I said, "Oh, is that good news?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I think it really is. We've been assured that the Masons brand," and Masons Ironstone is a wonderful and powerful thing, "Masons brand will live on in the Wedgwood family." And I said, "And how about this marvellous factory?" Because it's a very, very good factory, the Masons factory. He said, "Oh, yes, no, that's absolutely secure. It's going to be where we'll make it. It's going to be the centre of the Masons brand." 2 weeks later, Masons went, and a month later, the factory was flat. And it only turned into Tesco about 15 years later. And again, I don't know how many people's husbands, fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers worked on Masons, but probably some of you, certainly thousands of people in Stoke. And you wave goodbye to that, and you're kind of wiping out what they did. Now, if Masons had been turned into Tesco, it would be fine. I'm not a great one for the Subway sandwich, but Subway live in one side of the North Staffs Hotel. It's fine. It may not be as easy to use as the one that was the petrol station, but it's not bad. And what it means is that someone's paying the rent that looks after that very important grade 1 or 2-star building that's the Staffordshire Hotel Railway Complex. And it's really important to have that there, because that's what happens when you get to Stoke, that building, and making those things work. You can't keep things working without a use. It just doesn't work. You can't pretend. Things need a use. But you can normally find one. The Masons' factory, even just the front of it, could have had Tesco behind it. And it would have been fine. We'd all have known it was the Masons' factory Tesco. Wouldn't have cost any more. Wouldn't be a problem. Might have made it less of a disastrous Tesco. But it wouldn't really have done anything but good. But that wasn't thought about at the time. and in doing so, we've thrown away a lot. OK, we've got a cheery end for you. I started off with that picture with the boarded up bits, which is in Hanley, very near to our factory. And on the right is the street next door, which I'm sure is exactly what's going to happen to those black... Well, I hope it's what's going to happen to the black ones. I see John nodding enthusiastically. He's just changing the demolition contract now. No, because I can tell you one thing. No, I can tell you. I can tell you that John is nothing but reactive. You can rely on him. There's a building to say no, but seriously, those buildings on the other side are really an example of best practice. Have you all seen those buildings in real life? Hands up who's been to look at them. Not enough. You've got to get down there. Do you know what street it's called? Anyone know the street's name? Travers Street. Really extraordinary. A set of houses. They are amongst the better ones anyway in that bit of Hanley. But they've been restored in a very thorough, very real... The back of them, I did take a photograph of the back, but I got slightly bored of changing the photographs around every 5 minutes and sending a new thing over here. The back of them is very modern. They've got sort of plate glass windows. Their gardens have been enlarged, I would guess, a little bit, and they've got new garden walls, and they are houses that anybody would like to live in. And that's the best news. That's what makes me happy in Stoke, to know that the person whose granny lived in those houses, and the person whose grandfather died in that bedroom, and the person who was born there, and the person who took their first baby home from hospital to that house, will always know that the place that matters to them is there. And when they feel lost in a changing place, and there are lots of good changes to happen here, they'll be able to hang on to that. And that's what the streets of Stoke are for. They're to do that with. And so that, I think, is the answer. Marvellous timing. I can't tell you how good that was. Marvellous timing. Absolutely spot on to the minute of what I said. That is why Stoke makes you happy. Boom, boom.
Thank you very much for the talk tonight. Yeah, thank you. See, we got Mr. Van der Laarschot here. Now, you're talking about we need stormtroopers, but really we need people with vision to be able to take the city forward as regards our heritage, especially when we've got places like Wedgwood Big House, Fenton Town Hall, and the old Victoria site, which holds a hell of a lot of heritage, which gave the city status. Now, I'd like to know what Mr. Laarschot's got plans for such sites, which really could give us, how can I say, a focal point for visitors.
I'm not Mr. Van der Laarschot. I hate to disappoint you all. I'm afraid I am his supporter, which is, I know, very unpopular and completely unacceptable. But I actually think that someone needed to come here from outside who could see what was so good about it, because I think from inside we've made a perfect pig's ear of it for a long time. And I think that we've seen in the last 5 years some massive constructive changes. I have to say the Big House is possibly one of the biggest problems. It's an unbelievably marvellous. I'm not going to now land you in it with that one. He's just agreed to spend 2 million on it.
I'll talk to him after.
Yes. I'm very sorry you're going to be killed later on. No, John will answer that question later, but I think that there have been more solutions put out in the last few years than there ever have before. And I think there is, at the very least, a recognition, and indeed there is a plan afoot to look at a sort of an unofficial list of some of the things we care most about. I'm treading carefully here. You understand?
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, we ran a Heritage Commission. We had a great dialogue with people that are incredibly passionate about this city, and we had a very constructive dialogue with many of the developers. And what we would like to do wherever is practically possible is to lead on heritage-led regeneration. The challenge that we've got is, as City Council, we don't have the money to be able to do it all ourselves. And as Matthew said, you can drive heritage-led regeneration, but you need a use for those properties. You just can't make them look like dolls' houses and sit empty in the city. There needs to be an economic use for them.
Sadly true. That is a vision, I'm afraid. It's boring, but that isn't just a vision. That is English heritage's absolute credo. That unless you have a use, it can't happen. The trouble is that there are things which you can say, you know, there isn't obviously a massive use for Stonehenge at the moment. I mean, obviously there are moments. We did go to a very good midnight English heritage party at Stonehenge. There were some quite strange people, and I suppose it's fair to say it was used that night one way and another, often by the police taking the users away from it. But in general, our listing policy protects those things that are of national importance. Actually, in truth, Stoke has buildings that are of local importance. It's very, very real. There are some buildings of national importance, but they are buildings, I suppose, that relate to Wedgwood, and so that house is very important. And there are other extraordinary buildings here, but it doesn't have very many individual buildings of national importance. It doesn't have very many Grade 1 buildings, in actual fact, consequently, in it. But it does have buildings that are of colossal local significance. And that's why I think that the current review that's being held into those is significant, because it isn't saying how we're going to turn these all into Grade 1 buildings, because that won't work. It shouldn't work. Otherwise, you're devaluing, you're knocking down the A-level grades. It's getting dangerously Govey now, isn't it? But it is that. We need to work out what's the real fact. And the real fact is that we have got some brilliant buildings here, and some good buildings that will find good uses. Hanley Town Hall will find a good use. I don't know what will happen to Fenton. That's a good building. It will have to find something. They may be odd. I don't think that the North Staffs Hotel expected to have subway in that building. I don't know whether it belongs to them or the railway station. I mean, that's not an obvious use for it. It's a rather sordid use for it. But it is a use for it, and they will be paying a rent, and it means that that marvellous passage of building is secure. Hello.
Matthew, thank you for your talk. Your question is, can Stoke-on-Trent make you happy? I would say yes, it can, because it made me happy growing up there. And I know that it's made people from outside happy. My question is about the relationship between the built environment and the happiness and friendliness of the people who live in a place. In the 1960s, an eccentric author and long-distance walker named John Hillaby, who'd walked across Spain, across France, walked from Land's End to John O'Groats, and he passed through Stoke-on-Trent. And he finishes the chapter that refers to Stoke-on-Trent by saying, "Dear Stoke-on-Trent, how I love you, the dirtiest, friendliest place I have ever visited." What do you think it is about a place like that that makes people love it so much and be so friendly because they live there?
Well, it is true. It is an extraordinarily friendly place, and Emma came here 30 years ago, and I came here sometime afterwards, and we have had a totally and completely wholehearted, loving and friendly reception by the people who have helped us build her business. I can't think of anywhere else. I don't know anywhere else as much, but we've lived in other places, and I don't think that I do know anywhere where when you pass someone on the street, you can be absolutely sure that even if they're a crazed drug addict, they'll be a friendly one. The only time I was genuinely nervous in Stoke was in Tunstall Park when I was drawing that wonderful memorial in the middle of it. And it was evening in the summer. It was quite late, but I really wanted to draw the thing before it got dark. And it was getting dark. And a very big and very frightening young man, quite light on hair, with a big, not quite so much of a staffy kind of staffy as one would have liked, with a very studded collar, walked towards me, and I thought, oh, that is so stupid. I could have gone to my car 10 minutes ago, and it would be all right. And he walked over, and he walked behind me, and I thought, oh, well, here we go. And he said, I was too good at maths. I had to give up drawing at school. I really wish I'd kept it on. And then walked on. So I do think that Stoke is extraordinarily friendly. I suppose that there are some things that might be said, which are slightly counterintuitive and almost a tiny bit negative, that make Stoke friendly. It's quite a non-hierarchical city. And I think that might be probably the most significant thing about it. It's architecturally non-hierarchical. I rather unkindly said that its buildings were of local, not national importance, but that is true. They are, on the whole, of local importance. And as such, it doesn't have I'm not being unkind about Liverpool, but it doesn't have the scale of public buildings that, for example, Liverpool or Manchester have. It has a domestic scale. The extraordinary geography of Stoke, the extraordinary topography of Stoke, and the very short history of Stoke means that dynasties and factions, and I say this with great care because I know less than I'm sure most of you about this, haven't made it, except possibly a slight rivalry between Port Vale and Stoke City, into a place that has the kind of deep-riven class divides that a lot of cities have, and I think that it has a homogeneity which probably is very constructive and possibly quite a model of a city compared to some other places. There isn't a, maybe it's the opposite of Venice. Certainly the opposite of Venice in many other ways. So I would say that that's the case. I think that the buildings, I think buildings do make you happy if you love them. They really make you happy if they're your home. The building that makes you happiest is your home. And that's why you have to look after your home, not grub the fag ends out the side of your bed and the carpet doesn't make your bedroom nice. You have to look after your house, you have to look after your city in that way. But I think that, I think the buildings here are domestic. Even the factories are quite domestic. Our factory is just like every other pottery and factory, Stoke factory. The fingers of it are 16 feet across because, well, partially because that's the dimension that timber was imported in the 19th century, but also because in a pre-electric age, Stoke was a city whose industry required handwork, not machines. And so compared to the mill towns, places that had noisy and dangerous looms and bobbin winders and all the other marvellous things you might see at Style, Stoke was a place of quiet factories and of rooms where people were talking to one another, as opposed to sending their tiny children running. I'm sure they had their tiny children with potters' rot in their hands falling off left, right and centre, but they were nevertheless doing so in a domestic environment, really, in a scale that helps people be friendly. I don't know whether that is, either of those are factors. I think they might be factors, but I'm only saying that in a purely conjectural way.
I think if I may comment on
Yes.
your response, Matthew, Stoke-on-Trent used to be the place where you lived in Tunstall or Fenton, rather than the suburbs or the centre. And I think people who lived in Fenton would probably rib people who lived in Longton, their neighbours next door, and yet really they respected them because they were the same as they were. So you're right in saying that it's a non-hierarchical city. I think attempts recently to try and make it hierarchical, to give it a centre, are demonstrations of the sort of negative things that you're talking about.
Without going into that one in huge detail, I think it is a really hard thing. It's very hard if you visit Stoke, which is of course much less important, but it does matter in terms of inward investment. It's very hard to get a hang of the place. Does Stoke make people happy? 50,000 people come a year and walk round our factory, and it and the people who work there makes them happy. We have a huge electronic postbag of people who've been made happy. We have people for lunch occasionally in our factory who have never been here because most people say, no, I know all about it, no, I've never been there. And when people come, they are made happy. So I think that people coming in matter too, and I think there is an argument, a centralising argument, because people need to know where they are. It's quite hard to know where they are in some places. If you drive people around, I mean, I suppose the geography of Stoke has got some difficulties. There is a marvellous thing called the Wedgwood Museum, blissfully safe, and we try and make those 50,000 people who come to our factory go to that. But trying to even begin to explain how to get there, let alone actually hope they'll get there, it's hard enough to get them to the City Museum. In fact, it's almost impossible to get them to go there because that would involve walking 20 yards. But to get them to drive to the Wedgwood Museum, you more or less have to get a fleet of helicopters organised to get them there. Somebody else. Hello.
The empty,
She's quite noisy enough as it is. She doesn't need a microphone.
sorry, the empty Spode building.
Yes.
The wonderful Spode factory. You're a man of vision.
Ah.
What would you like to see happen to that building to save it? Just supposing you had all the money in the world, what would you do with it to make people want to come and visit it or come to Stoke?
Well, I like the idea of being a man of vision. I think it's a really difficult one. I think probably I wouldn't make a museum there. I think I wouldn't try and make a cultural centre. I wouldn't try and make a place that pulls everything together. I think it's got 12 marvellous buildings. I think I would try and find ways of turning those into unbelievably high-status flats, places that would be really lovely to live in somewhere that is of world importance. I can't remember, is the mould shop of grade 1? Is Fred, is...
No, it's not grade.
It's not. Is any of the Spode factory grade 1 or not?
I think it's just in a conservation zone.
It just is. Well, I mean, but it is probably got the best factory buildings in Stoke now, really. I think I'd be really boring. I think it's where I build houses. We need millions of houses in England. I'd make it, I think you've got something. Oh, that is in a way illustrates exactly what I would say. You've got something to hang on to. I'd make each one of those buildings one side of a marvellous square, so that when you were living in the modern flats on the other side, like the ones perhaps in Nantes that look onto the elephant factory, that while you were there, you were looking at Stoke's heritage in front of you, and I would use some of the money that one made by building those houses. Now, it's easy to say that. That's a vision. That's not finding the money, as John knows. Finding people who want to develop here is difficult. No. Finding people that want to develop responsibly and well here is difficult. Do you want to say something about Spode?
No, I think when you look at the Spode site, I mean, it's got some absolutely fabulous historic architecture there, and there's some absolute rubbish in there as well. And the real challenge is about taking out the rubbish and leaving the bits that are really fabulous there, and then taking a view as to how you would drive it forward. And I think the views that we've got at the moment, and we are talking all the time with prospective investors and prospective developers, is around a kind of a mixed use. So getting something that's twee, that fits with the architecture of those old buildings, but to Matthew's point, is also supplemented by housing done in the right kind of way, so you get a nice kind of mix and match of the styles, so you can protect the heritage, but you can drive the value there, so we can bring the site through to fruition. It's not easy. I mean, you get a lot of people say, well, let's make it all arts and crafts. Well, actually, what we are trying to do across the city is to get some distinction between the towns and their roles that they play together across the city, so you can't do the same everywhere. So you need to get a decent balance. It's right next to the university here. It's a great location for young people. If we could do something along those sort of veins and attract more young people into the town through that site, again, that could be highly advantageous. So there is no definitive at the moment. There's a lot of discussion, but we're sensitive.
Yeah, one of the difficult things, I think, is that touching on what I said earlier, if you leave university, if you leave Staffs or Keele, and you want to do what you've learned in the place where you are, what you need is cheap. If you develop somewhere, it just can't be cheap. With the council, you can't subsidise cheap space for people. You can't. This is a city that can't afford to do that. So somehow, okay, the vision, the smart bit, is saying what are the things you can identify that don't need restoring, that can be quite basic, that don't pass health and safety regulations, that aren't quite good enough. How can you get people to colonise those? That's why the pound a house thing is strong. Maybe you could do the pound a square foot thing for offices forever, as opposed to every year. I think that the business of getting investment in is the huge challenge. Once you get it in, you can begin to do something with it. I'm sure that in 25 years' time, I think, whereas 10 years ago I would think the Spode site would have gone completely, I think we can be fairly sure that the good buildings of Spode will be there, and some of us grind our teeth at the fact that the mould shop is Morrison's. But I would rather that the mould shop was Morrison's than the mould shop was landfill.
You can make Spode into a gated village for the Stoke City £1 million players.
So they couldn't get out and cause trouble.
And then John could come back.
Yes.
And live amongst us in that village with the footballers.
Yeah, that's
and yourself, Mike.
that would be nice. I've always liked a gated community. I think they're underrated, and as long as I had the key to the gate and could leave them all in and go out, it'd be absolutely fine. No, I mean, that's a big thing, the business of there are some marvellous big houses in Stoke, but it's as described, it's not a city that's required a huge number. that would be a good place for them to be. It would be a good place. You know, it would be lovely. Wouldn't it be marvellous if there were 100 independent shops? But there won't be 100 independent shops. There can't possibly be. There aren't 100 independent shops in the whole of Staffordshire that are going to make that. You have to work out what there might be. And John knows I have been a bit suspicious about retail-led regeneration, because I think that, you know, Stoke will always be able to support good shops, because a lot of people have to do their shopping and will do their shopping, and, you know, the shopping in Stoke is, you go and buy your shirt in Stoke, it's the same as buying it anywhere else. Whether there's enough to have 2 or 3 huge centres doing that, I don't know. I mean, I think that what you know is that the whole of Britain is closing its retail business down at the moment because it's online. Every high street, everywhere you like, in London, even in the world's most commercially vibrant capital, there's a real crisis away from the prime retail streets. We've got a shop on the Fulham Road. There's nobody there. There's just nobody goes shopping in those places out of the middle now. And so trying to do, there'll be some brilliant retail here, but it won't be the leader of those things, I don't think. Someone else. Look, here's a nice lady.
I was born in Burton. I work here at the university. I think what makes people happy, it was interesting your comments about mixing, because we've had a conversation, ironically, a little bit of a conversation beforehand. Hanley is seen as the city centre, and I was saying that for an evening, I was joking, saying you almost do need to zone it. You need the young people over here, the older people over there, because at the moment, it's not only about the buildings, it's the whole living experience of living in the city. And I think the challenge is, at the moment, for example, if you go to Birmingham, people go there shopping for the day, they'll stay there into the evening, they'll have a meal, and I think...
And then rush back to their hotel before the stag nights begin.
But your comments about independent shops, I mean, it's not sustainable, so one has to offset the other. You have to have big retailers intermingled with independent shops, and I think that is slightly lacking within Stoke-on-Trent.
Have schmav. What's the have to? How do you find them? Have you got one? It's really. I know what you're saying, but someone's got to open the independent shop for you to have the mix. Yeah. At the moment, no one is. Yeah. We're pulling out of our shops because they don't make any money. They lose money all the time. It's difficult.
In the 80s, and we had a lot more vibrant arts community. In fact, a lot of people came to Stoke-on-Trent, came to the university because we had a very strong arts community. We had a lot of independent bars and a lot of independent shops. My sister lives in a place called Asheville in the States in North Carolina, which had a lot of problems in the 1980s, and now it's got more microbreweries than any other place in the whole country. That's levered that place into developing. But I think it's more than just the whole buildings, because I can kind of get nostalgic, but it's the whole package, I'm saying. It's not only the day, it's the evening. We've got people of older people generation that have got money now that can come into the town, but places like Hanley are very difficult for older generations to come in. And if you go to Europe, you've got younger people mixing in the evenings, which we don't have in this city.
There's quite a lot in there. First of all, most of what you're saying, I would say, is more or less the same as what John says most of the time. You're coming from a very similar place on what you want. I've just forgotten, one of you will know, what's the name of the lady who's written a book about the decline of the American city in the 70s? It's a great... What are they called? Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a marvellous bit in the beginning of that book where she talks about the importance of streets overlooking what people are doing, and the business of having a mixed community mattering because it prevents everything going wrong. Basically, you won't behave that badly while your granny's watching. You won't actually behave that badly while your friend's granny's watching it, because you're not going to do that, are you? Because otherwise she might get cross, get you with a stick. And so I think it would be better if more people lived in the middle of Hanley. Frankly, and I think that it would be good. I mean, I didn't have for a very long time. I think it would be nice if more people lived there than had before, because there are restaurants there, and it's nice to live where you can walk out to a restaurant. And I don't think anyone can accuse Stoke of being bad at drinking. It seems to be frightfully good at drinking one way or another. Got to hang around in Hanley on a sort of Tuesday night in February to see a lot of young people who've been very competent in their drinking, possibly over-competent in their drinking. But the microbrewery thing is marvellous. And Williamsburg has got, as we mentioned it, a vast, great big visitor attraction brewery. It's a very good thing. Someone's got to open it. These things don't get. John can't produce a microbrewery. He could. He's quite good at soft drinks. So he could easily decide to do that instead, but he's doing Stoke. And someone, one of you or one of your sons or one of your brothers or whatever it is, can do a microbrewery. This is a very good place to do something. It is quite cheap. The property values are cheap. Rents are cheap. John will let them off their rates. There are a whole load of things that make this a good place to do that. I don't know why there aren't. When you drive across the Midwest, I have had Emma and I had two big, three actually, big driving across America trips. And I got a little bit frantic about coffee. I just really had it with diner coffee. Actually, now I really like it, but at the time I really wanted real coffee. And so you'd veer 200 or 300 miles off the road towards any university town in the hope that you would find somewhere that made real coffee, and next to it was the microbrewery. I mean, that is what happens. There's an awful lot of in-between in America. Even in Carolina, there's a lot of there's a lot of out there before you get to those places. This city possibly has. I think the city is very, very well placed to thrive. Maybe not right now, but I think it is well placed because it's slap bang in the middle of Britain with the M6 running through it and everything else. So I think it is very well placed, but it is massively disadvantaged by being halfway between Birmingham and Manchester, because it costs 14 quid to get to Manchester, and it costs £26 to get to. Why it costs more to get to Birmingham, I don't know. But anyway, I'm sure there's got a frightfully good reason. Norwich is a city which is not very much larger than this. It's absolutely unbelievably brilliant city. You go there and you think, but it is full of independent shops. It's got 56 pubs. It's got millions of incredibly good restaurants. It's got hotels. It's got this amazing city preserved landscape. Why? Because there's nothing in between Norwich and Newcastle. And there's nothing in between Norwich and Birmingham. And there's nothing in between Norwich and London. Absolutely bugger all. Just secondary places. And we're in the opposite position here. We've got two massive primary places 40 miles away. There's so in retail and food and some of that energy that Norwich can summon up, we haven't got that sort of geographical advantage, I don't think. So it's got to be more local. Hello. Look, gentleman with the hat and the tash.
It's interesting what you're saying there, because I think from a destination marketing point of view, not only do you need to attract people into Stoke-on-Trent, you need to, in a way, dissuade people from going out of Stoke-on-Trent to do their shopping.
Much more important, yeah.
And I think it's, you probably can't have one without the other. You need to, well, if Stoke-on-Trent makes you happy, you'll stay here and shop rather than go somewhere else, and then other people will come in.
Okay, but listen, I mean, I think it's a really, really good point. It's one of the, it is definitely true, and there is a bit of a problem. The shopping is fairly ordinary compared to Manchester and compared to Birmingham. Although I have eaten many very nice meals in Stoke, the food is fairly ordinary in Stoke compared to those other places. So, yeah, one would need to sharpen up. And people have done things. I mean, yeah, I completely agree, but you can't make people, just like you can't tell someone they've got to live in an old house because it's picturesque. You can't tell someone they've got to eat grubby food because that's what they've got to eat. People like to get out there, they like to go and find it, and it would be much cheaper and much more economical and immeasurably better for the economy if people did things here. I totally agree, but again, you've all got to open restaurants. Look, there's a man with thousands of fingers up there.
My question is, I suppose, twofold really. The first one is, who do you think, you talk about stormtroopers, and obviously heritage-wise, like Wedgwood is a stormtrooper. Who do you see as stormtroopers today to bring people into the city? Or do we look at people who are producing locally, people say like Andrew Hall or Anita Harris? Could we not tap into them as the stormtroopers for the city? Or do you see anything else that we can attract people into the city? and to use these buildings. And the second part is, this morning we were at the Tower of London and we were looking at the poppies. Now, pottery with the poppies as well. Is there anything that we can do that you think that can attract people here? Because that has just been a phenomenon and big chaos there.
Well, if Richard were here, he'd be on about the Saxon warrior, I think, wouldn't he? But I'm not. He's not. So I'm not going to talk about. No, I mean, okay. Two things. First of all, and second one, yes. Those if there's the poppies works because it's the right place to put the poppies, because it's a good idea, and because it's easier, frankly, to do that around one of the world's greatest tourist attractions than it would be to do that along the side of the D road. Yes, I think that big talismanic, I hate the word, everybody, I can't think what on earth the word, iconic. I think that icons are, if they're, an icon is good, if icons represent something in shorthand. They're a formalization, they are a formulaic way of saying something, and that's why they're really powerful. And they need to say something. An icon, when people say the Shard's an icon, it's a load of absolute crap. It's just a tall building with a spike on the top. It may be a marvellous one and wonderful, but not an icon. An icon of anything doesn't mean anything. It just means I've got an office block. And so I think that those poppies are something very much more significant. And yes, I totally agree. And again, someone's got to think that one up. I don't mean that in a sort of flippant way, but I mean, yes, we could do that. In terms of the stormtroopers, that wasn't. I think those people are the sort of banner wavers and the trailblazers. I don't think that. I think what I mean about the stormtroopers is, you've all said it's the wrong word anyway, stormtroopers, and I'm supposed to mean something else. Shock troops, everything I'm supposed to say. What about them? Oh yeah, no, those are the ones. No, those are the ones, because what you're saying is, who's prepared to go boldly into the crummy street, the crappy factory, the dreary old shop, and do something exciting? Who's prepared to put their head on the block, thing on the line? You know, who's going to do those? I think that's what I mean by shock troopers, is the people who are going to take the risk takers, aren't they? They're the people who will do something that's unlikely and brave, and who have, basically, they're people who are feckless and stupid enough to do it, some of whom will topple under gunfire, but some of them will prevail, and that's what makes economic energy. So I think I mean that. Those other people are very, very important, and the more of those there are, and the more people that big up the city, the more people will think about it. But in a way, I think that what you said about the business, it is important. Inward investment is very important. It's vital to John for him to do his job. It's incredibly important for us to run our business, really, really important. But it isn't the whole story of making the place work. I think the other way around, getting people to stay and spend here, is good. Now that there's a man in a tie.
Just to say that we're talking about trying to get people to come here, but what we're losing are our children who are going elsewhere. There's nothing here for them.
They're not going to come here tonight, are they? They'll die of boredom, I'm sure of that.
But, you know, what jobs are there here, what education facilities and so on?
Well, quite a lot of education. One thing you can't throw at Stoke is a lack of educational facilities. It's got two vast universities and thousands of students. What's the full number of students?
I couldn't give you the number top of mind, but I mean, we've just spent the best part of £280 million upgrading all of the schools estate across the city. That's before you add in all the investment that the universities put in here, that the sixth form colleges put in. So in terms of the education provision, it's absolutely second to none. The attainment rates continue to improve year on year, which is really, really key.
We've got no places problem instead. We have enough school spaces.
We've got enough spaces. The challenge that we have is transitioning into work. And so the whole piece, the whole bit we're pushing forward here is about trying to increase the prosperity of the city by creating job opportunities that our young people can fill. That's the challenge.
Yeah, but, okay, and so with jobs, there's three ways you can get jobs. You can join a big business, you can join a little business, or you can work for yourself. And I think that one of the big challenges, which we should be really good at dealing with, is persuading graduates to set up their first business here. We should be able to prevail in that, because we should be able to promote that. Promote means like you promote, like discount. So we should be able to find places for people to do and whatever they want to do, and our universities have a lot of very, very brilliant departments. We are incredibly good at all sorts of art and design and all sorts of other subjects. And so making this the place that they want to stay, those people want to stay, children want to stay as they grow up and do those things, it is a massive and huge challenge. I completely agree. We have the benefit that if you want to buy a small terrace house in Lavender Hill, it costs 1.4 million. If you want to buy it here, it costs 70,000 or 60 or 40 or £1. And that is a big advantage. That isn't nothing. So I think that that's very important. I think that people who employ people, we have had, until 3 years ago, I was the average age of our employees, which is not good. So although I am exceptionally youthful and lively, that is not a good future for a business. And in the last 5 years, we have been proactive in trying to get young people to come and work. And it's worked. Look, there is one. Go on. Oh, look, she's lovely and young.
Yeah, I was going to say two things, actually. The first one, yeah, I am young.
Yes.
I'm 24.
Amazing, wonderful, brilliant young.
I'm a first-class graduate from Manchester University, and I came back here, I'm originally from Stoke, because I love it, but you know, and it's there's things that you were talking about, the fact that like I can go and see my grandparents' house in Fenton, and that I can remember all these things, and the Jack Frost on the side of the shopping centre, which I suppose architecturally probably think is awful, but like, you know, that's like coming home, and that's why I've stayed here. So I think there's kind of the thing about getting young people to stay, for me at least, supports your original.
Are you working here or not?
I am. I've just got a new job.
Very nice. There's the hero. Makes Stoke happy.
And then, yeah, the other thing, go back to the sexy young artists who kind of think the place is amazing. I kind of think of the Northern Quarter in Manchester when you were saying about that, and Ancoats kind of thing. So how then do you kind of make the transition from these kind of young and sexy people to it being the kind of inclusive older people are around too, and it's not just kind of exclusive for the young hipsters?
I suppose the sexy ones get less sexy as the years go on. That's just unfortunately how it works. No, I think, well, I hope by the sort of osmosis of attraction that I want to live next door to you. And you want to live, I don't know, next to, I don't know, you know.
I want to live next door to John Marshall.
Well, I know, but not for entirely good reasons in your case. Whereas I've got completely nice reasons that I feel there's a subtext that could only be quite tricky, and when the fence was built up. Anyway, no, I think that you and your friend and their friend and their friend and your life and then your babies and then their life will make where you live attractive. And so I think that you won't want to live to you'll put up with moving away from your soulmate and want to move over there instead.
Borrow a couple of milk off him when I'm stuck.
Yeah, well, you could. I'm sure he'll pay to get rid of you. But I think that you will want to go and live there because you'll want to see what you're doing. I think that's nice. And whether it's Ancoats or whether it's Hoxton or whether it's, I can't remember what was the place that was miles out east where you saw the sea from it? Clacton. Bull's Pond. You know, I mean, there are places people go a long way because they want to find somewhere affordable, and then those places become nice, and before you know where you are, you can get coffee, and then shortly afterwards you can't get coffee because it's been taken over by a coffee company instead. Then you can't get the nice coffee. Then you move, and you do it somewhere else. That's why it's the stormtrooper thing. Look, yes.
In your model of living in the sexy young people.
Oh yes, there may not be enough to go round, by the way, for my model. I can see that's a problem.
But Hoxton or Hackney or Glasgow or Liverpool or Manchester, all these have done this. They've, sexy young people, no money, but create this vibe and this feeling. And then industry starts to come in and business starts to come in and people generate money and then people come in and buy up houses. In doing that, and they want restaurants and bars, etc. In doing that, that's going to change the DNA of the city. That's going to change the people.
for the better, I think, because eventually those people, they'll go off and do it somewhere else. And what you want is to regenerate, and you can't regenerate into something stable, because A, the sexy young people are, as I said, getting older and increasingly less sexy by the day, and B, I think you need to do it. You've had enough. They've had enough. That's what happens. All the young people are leaving Stoke. And those are the last ones just... they're not just the young ones either, I can tell you. And some of the other beautiful people of Stoke are also leaving. I think...
There goes our DNA.
What?
There goes our DNA.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's it. Goodbye. Not at all. You're all allowed to go. Okay, I think that's enough, don't you?
I was just about to say, you kept time admirably.
Don't worry, I've got 30 seconds. I have been watching, rest assured.
Run on a little bit with the questions and answers. So.
Good. Well, there you are. Listen, you're very, very kind to come. Thank you so much. The great news is, next time you get Tristram Hunt, I will just tell you one last story. Emma's stepfather went to a lecture in Oxford about brain damage, quite a serious and unhappy-making subject. And behind him, in the next door row, were two old ladies, and they'd all sat through quite a gruelling lecture on brain damage. And at the end of it, the person finished talking, and the rather dazed audience sat there as the lights went on. And he got his coat and he got out, and he said to and he heard the two ladies saying, "Did you enjoy that?" The other one said, "Oh yes, I think next week will be better." She said, "What's that?" "It's hedgehogs," she said. I commend you, Tristram Hunt. Goodbye.
I came this evening full of expectation. Matthew is a bit of a romantic, but absolutely passionate about the city of Stoke-on-Trent and a lot of the heritage buildings that we have here. He and I have had many conversations about how we drive the city forward, and I was interested to hear what he had to say this evening. The highlights of this evening were the audience participation and the very mature level of questioning about how we drive this city forward and how this city can truly make us happy and how we can make it a happy place to live.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'd already read Matthew's book, so it was really interesting to pull together some of his thoughts about buildings, and I have great feelings about Stoke and how it should be, but then it's interesting to hear how he might have perceived it to be and how we would gain happiness from living here.
I thought this evening's lecture was absolutely riveting. It was amusing. He's a wonderful speaker, and he's outspoken. Matthew Rice is very outspoken, and it was very, very entertaining.
It surprised me the age of the people that will be there, because I was expecting quite older people, because I had the feeling that the very old generation have a memory quite different of Stoke-on-Trent from the new generation. Because when I talk to older people, they're always saying about all these lovely pubs or lovely corner in the town. But when I talk to younger people, they always telling me how crap is this place. I don't want to live here. So I think the new generation being here in a certain way is a way to put together an entire town. So the younger generation, older generation, and the people that can do actually something.